I grew up into a church where the elder of the church was the main speaker. The pastor will come once in a while, like every 3 months, for one Saturday. And this elder had one main story to tell, and that was that we are God's children and we owe him obedience. And he had all the time a parable for us that he will use every single sermon with no exception. You will hear that parable, and that was a parable about little Johnny. Little Johnny is educated by his mom to be, to behave and be obedient to his parents. And in one day, the mother of little Johnny leaves the house and asks him to behave at home while she's gone. And little Johnny promised that he's going to behave, and then as soon as she leaves and no one's home with him, little Johnny does all kind of crazy stuff in the house, destroys some furniture, drops some dishes, uh, all kind of crazy things. And then the mother comes back and finds little Johnny very quiet. And then she realizes what's going on, and then, he receives the punishment. And the conclusion always was, so is between us and God. He has instructed us what to do and what not to do. He is expecting us to behave, and if we don't behave well, then he's coming back. And when he's coming back, he's going to pay us what we deserve. Just like in the case of Johnny. That was the main sermon, that was the main concept all the time with no exception. And of course, we kind of got tired of that, but we'll go there anyway. I always wonder why we'll insist going there, because we knew from the beginning what was about to be said, and all along we knew every idea that he will come up with. And so I grew up in this church that will not offer me too much. But somehow, because of the event that happened after being burned, soon after I was 9 months old when I literally died, and the nurse came, declared me dead. She wrote the certificate of death, and then. My mother said, I'm not going to disturb my father. I'm not going to disturb him from his job. I will let him come home, and then I'll deliver him the news, the bad news. And as she saw him coming along the way, she ran before him and shared with him the tragedy. But he remained, he was not in shock at all. He came home and told my mother that actually they need to pray so God will resurrect me. So they did so. They prayed, and I resurrected. And during the prayer, they said, God, if you bring him back to life, he's going to be given unto you for entire his life. Well, I learned about this story that I'm sharing with you when I was close to 20 years old. I was in the army. I came into vacation, and I made a joke that was probably inappropriate. I don't know, but something made my mom to think that I need to know the story. So she shared with me the story in that moment. While I was going back to the army from the vacation, it was dark. I was in the train. It was dark. I was looking through the window, and I was seeing myself in the window because inside was light, outside was dark, and the window glass functioned like a mirror. So I saw myself there, and I heard very clearly, like someone was staying near me, asking me, so that is all, Nick? This is all? You like the life you are living? And that question actually converted me. It was probably God talking to me in that moment. So I learned that I am called to serve the Lord. And the reality is that when any one of us is called to serve God in any capacity, that is a gift from God. It is not a service, it's a blessing. Let's face it. So when I finished the army, I went back to that church where little Johnny was still on, you know. And I was 20 years old now. I couldn't handle that. So I started getting involved in that church. And so is how I ended up starting preaching. Now, first time when I preached, I was 5 years old. My parents gave a shot when I was 5 years old. They thought that because God resurrected me, I must be a very special one, you know. So they gave a shot and put me in the front of the people to tell them one little poem. Well, I went there, and that's all I knew to do. I knew to go up there, and I stood in the front of them, and even though I knew the poem, I knew it. I couldn't say a word. Then I got so mad with myself and so frustrated that I started crying. And from crying, I started sobbing. And everybody in the church, they were telling my mom, hey, take him from there. That's it. He can't do it. No, my mom thought that God is going to do a miracle right there and open my mouth. And so she let me, have it for probably 10 minutes, trying, and she was telling me the first words of the poem and trying to get me to say something, but I was sobbing, and I sobbed from the beginning to the end. So finally she gave up. That was my first attempt to speak publicly. I was so shy and timid that I could not open my mouth publicly whatsoever. So now I'm 20 years old. I finished the army. I learned from my mother that I'm called by God to ministry. And I'm disappointed with the spiritual food that is offered in the church. So I received the call to preach there. So my first sermon, I knew the sermon by heart, every word of it. I learned it for months and months, that sermon. I mean, I could say it even in the sleep time, okay? I'm right there in the front of the people, and I was able to say several words, and suddenly my mouth continued to move, but there was no voice coming out. And it will take like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and I continued to speak, but no voice, no sound will come out. And after a few minutes, I will be so disappointed and so frustrated with myself that I will be terrible. I feel terrible, almost to give up and go there and sit down, and that's it. This is the end of it. And I was, in my mind, I was fighting with God. You called me to ministry, and I cannot even stand in the front of the people to speak. And I will end up just reading until the end, the sermon. It was terrible. I mean, I'm telling you, it was terrible for those who were there, poor people. And I finished that my first upfront speaking. I cannot call it a sermon. I finished it somehow. And at the end, people were coming and they were saying, wow, that was great, that was wonderful, wow. And what? I'm so disappointed in myself that I'm not sharing with them, but I'm amazed of their, no, it was wonderful, you did good, you did great, you have to do it again. I know there was good for them for a change. I mean, from Johnny to that, probably. I couldn't make any sense of their, no, you are doing great, don't worry, Nick, don't worry. So I prepared another one, and when it was my turn, I delivered another sermon, and again, here you go, 2 minutes, 3 minutes into the sermon, suddenly my voice disappears, and I'm still blah, 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 opening my mouth and speaking, no one hears nothing. There is no noise whatsoever, just my mouth moving. And everybody, now they are very, very attentive, and I'm saying to myself, wow, they are paying so much attention, I can't say anything. And that goes on and on and on for months and months and months and months. And then I learned what happened. And there were always, with no exception, in spite of that moment when I could not speak, I was moving my mouth, but no noise will come out. Every time, with no exception, that phase will come into my sermon. And then months later, I learned why they were so nice and kind with appreciation at the end of my sermons. They were saying, Oh, you are doing good. You are doing good. We are looking for the next one. We are looking for the next one. You know why? Because they were bidding between them. They were saying, I bet you $1 that he is going to do it again. And the other said, no, I bet you with $2, he's not going to do it this time. And that was their entertainment. I mean, that was their entertainment. In the beginning, I started by entertaining people. And then I decided no more. That's it. When I learned that was too much, too humiliating for myself. So I went before the Lord and I said, if you give me a call, you have to give me the gift too. I mean, you can't give me a call without equipping me. So I stood there before the Lord and He did it. Right now, it looks to you very natural, but it's not very natural for me to speak. This is a gift from God. I know myself. If you put me into another position, I'll be very shy and very, very... There is nothing that God calls us to do that is not a blessing. Because according with our life experience and the statements made by the Word of God itself, people, we all are sinners. The Bible says, for all have sinned. There is no one without sin, not even one, says the Lord. So we are sinners. In Romans chapter 6, verse 23 says very clearly, which is the wages of sin. The wages of sin is death. So the only thing we deserve is... so if you look for something to deserve, the only thing we deserve is death. If anything else positive comes in our way, it's because of God's grace. And I'm telling you, everything that comes in our way and is positive, it's a gift from above, from the Father of light. It is a gift. It is not something that you deserve. The person that sits next to you and loves you, you don't deserve that. The only thing you deserve and I deserve is death. The person that looks up to you, you don't deserve that. You deserve death. That's the only thing. The fact that you have a life, that you are healthy, that you have a car, that you have a family, that you have a job, that you have some skill, that you can do something, that you have a mind, that you are able to say something, that you have a mouth to speak, that you have eyes to see. All of these are only what? Gifts. They come as a result of God's grace. The only thing we ever deserve, people, and will always ever deserve, will be just death. If it will be for God to look at us and say what he or she may deserve today, the only thing will come out will be death, because we are sinners, and the wages of sin is death. But God is so wonderfully gracious toward us that our life is not a mess, and we are doing pretty good, and that is entirely a result of His grace. Do you agree with me? Now, the reality is, as I shared with you the story in the beginning, that when God's grace comes in our lives, when God's grace comes in our ways, it is not always an easy thing. As most of the time it catches us by surprise, and most of the time when God is giving us a grace, our part in it looks very difficult. And what we are about to suffer in order to accept that grace, it looks terrible. You know, I grew up into a communist country. To become Christian into communist country was like it was like suicide. Really, I mean, suicide. You'll either end up being in a prison, or you'll end up not being able to accomplish anything in your life because you'll be limited. You can't go to school because you are a Christian. You can go in this job because you are a Christian. You can say that, you can do that, you can do that. There were so many restrictions and limitations to the Christians that it will be suicide, literally suicide, to just accept to be a Christian. Well, to be saved means to accept Jesus Christ. Am I right? To accept Jesus Christ meant to be a Christian. You see, even though to be saved is an act of grace, it's a gift that comes from the Lord. to accept that gift into a communist country was suicidal. It will take too much to be able to accept that grace. And in America, you have enjoy freedom. Here, there was no communism, and to accept God and to accept Jesus Christ and to be saved, that was an easy task, you may say. No, it never comes easy. Does it? Never. Even here, in a free country, in order to be Christian, you have to give up on something. No? A life that you are used to, accustomed to. You have to every day do something different than you used to because you accepted Christ. So there is always something that you have to give in exchange to that gift that comes from God. There is always something. And that part that you have to play in order to receive and accept the gift of grace of God, that part is sometimes too much for us to carry. To the extent that at one point, each and every one of us, we refuse that particular gift of grace of God because what part requires from us to play is too much for us to handle. Do you agree with me? Have you ever rejected God's grace because it was too much for you to handle and took you by surprise and you were not prepared and ready to do that? You look at me and say, what? If it's God's grace, it's God's grace. No, it's not like that. It's not simply like that. We'll take today one example, a study case on Israel. It's reported in the book of Numbers. And there, we'll go from there and we'll conclude from there our lesson today. As you can see, the title today is Refuse It at Your Own Expense. When you are tempted to refuse God's grace, God's offer, God's gift, when you are tempted to do so, remember that there will always be expenses that are associated with that refuse. You are going to always pay something because you refuse God's grace. You remember in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8 and 9, we read,
For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, so that no one can boast.
It is a gift from God and has nothing to do with us, is not of ourselves, and because of that, we have the idea and the impression that once God start putting His grace upon us, it doesn't take anything from us. It's not an effort or anything like this is expected from us. All that it takes is us to be willing and able to receive it. Am I right? Yes? Well, it's not like that. It's not simply like that. And it is not simple like that because we live into this world where sin and its rules are imposed. We are living into a world that doesn't do well with grace. It's not made for grace. It fights, actually, as a matter of fact, grace and everything that comes from God. And it makes it very difficult for us to be willing, able, and always ready to accept God's grace. In fact, accepting God's grace becomes more and more difficult by the day and by the week and by the month and by the year. And this is why in God's economy, a time when Jesus Christ will come the second time and destroy completely this world is planned because God knows that by the time passes, it will become more and more difficult for people to accept His grace. You are still looking at me and say, what? I still don't get it. Okay, imagine you remember the final events. There will be a time when simply buying and selling stuff will be impossible for those who accept the grace of God, the salvation. Am I right? So, as the times pass by, accepting the grace of God will become more and more impossible. It will require more and more of us. It will imply something to sacrifice, something to give in, and at one point is going to require yourself, your own life. You want the grace? Yes. Well, you take it, but at the price of your life. Do you understand what I'm trying to say here? So at one point, each and every one of us will be tempted to refuse God's grace. And my message today is in preparation to such an event when, even though you desire that grace, even though the gift that comes from the grace of God will solve your greatest need of your life and will be the greatest thing to accept that gift of grace for you, will be the resolution for all your life, you will be not able to accept it. You want to do so, you desire with your heart, you understand how good that will be for you, but in the same time you will refuse it. Now, the fact and the matter is that God's grace uses crazy ways to come in our lives. It's not always the way we expect it. You remember Israel, they are in Egypt. For 400 years they were there, they have been there, they grew as a nation now, children, women, elderly people, you name it, and they are still in slavery, and they are crying out for the grace of God for the freedom. They are crying out, God gives us, come and take us and set us free and give us a land, give us a country, the country that you promised to our ancestor, to Abraham, give us the land, okay? So they are crying out for the grace of God. And when the grace of God came, it came so surprising for them and required so much from them that at one point they were rejecting Moses and said, hey, Moses, go, we don't need you. Here you go. You just came and you put us in the mouth of Pharaoh, and Pharaoh gave the decree. And now we are in a worse situation than we have been before you came. And this Moses was the grace of God for them. It was the man sent to liberate them. It was in answer to their prayer. This Moses and this liberation, the way God chose to send them the grace of freedom, it was so crazy, so unexpected for them that they said, no, we don't need you. We don't need you. Moses needed to go back to God, and God to send him back and say, you go there when I send you, in order to continue the events that we call, the events that led actually to the freedom of Israel from Egypt, of slavery. Not always the grace of God comes in a very expected manner. In fact, the reality is that every time, with no exception, when you receive a gift from God as a result of His grace, is always supernatural. It's always supernatural. And because it's supernatural, by definition, it's unexpected. Do you get that? Everything you receive from God is supernatural. The fact that we are living in spite of the fact that the wages of death of sin is death, it's supernatural. We are alive in spite of that. It was supernatural for Adam and Eve. What God said when they were before sinning. God said, if you eat from that tree, in the day when you eat, you will... And the fact that they lived 900 years after that was very supernatural for them. Am I right here? That was a gift of God's grace given to them. 900 years on earth, in spite of their sin, was a gift from the Lord. And it came supernatural. Everything that you receive from God is supernatural. Probably you get accustomed to the grace of God. Probably you get accustomed to live every day accepting more and more measures of God's grace, but the reality is that each and every measure of grace is supernatural, is unexpected. For human mindset, it's crazy, it's out there. It's not in your natural realm. It deals with a completely different realm, the realm of supernatural. We know that Israel refused God's gift of grace, the promised land, because they were afraid of the promised land people. We'll go into this subject a little bit, studying today, and in order to extract from their experience lessons for ourselves. Numbers chapter 13, verse 1. Israel is, in that moment, they left Egypt. There were 6 weeks, just 6 weeks. It's been in the moment where we are talking about in number 13, they were just for 6 weeks free from Egypt, from the slavery. All their travel from Egypt to the promised land took 6 weeks. In other words, The provisions they took when they exited Egypt, they still have it. Most of it. And because God supernaturally divided the sea before them so they can shorten the way, made it possible for them, even though there were many, they were young, they were elderly, there were women, there were kids, there were babies. The flocks themselves were slow. In spite of that, in spite of the crowd and the fact that everybody was slow and the motion was slow, in spite of everything, it took them just 6 weeks from Egypt to the promised land. Just 6 weeks. And everything was because of God's supernatural grace that he bestowed upon them. However, when you are so fast exiting the Egypt and 6 weeks later you find yourself in the front of the promised land, you don't even realize in what position you are. You take it for granted. Let me put it in this way. You think that, wow, and entering the promised land, it may sound to you like an option. If we enter it, we enter. If not, it's okay. It's okay. We can stay here because we still have provisions. We are not tired of wilderness and walking because it took just 6 weeks to be here. What we are actually very exciting is the first 6 weeks of freedom in our lives. Okay? So if we take the option that God offers us to enter in the promised land, it's okay. If not, it's okay again. You see how they saw it. Now, I want to mention this very clearly. This is a people without a country. Israel at that moment, they have no country. They have no land to call that land. It's our land, it's our country. So for 6 weeks, they travel through the wilderness. They arrive in the front of the promised land. They are people without a country. And God is telling them, out of my grace, I'm giving you this promised land as a country for you. And God is directing Moses and saying, Moses, I want you to do something. Let's read about this, starting with verse 1 in Numbers chapter 13.
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a leader among them. So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord, all of them men who were heads of the children of Israel. And Moses called Hosea, son of Nun, Joshua.
So there were 12 tribes of Israel, and God said, out of each one, take one leader and send it as a spy in the promised land to check it out. And Moses added to the 12, there were 12 tribes, 12 leaders. Moses added to the 12 his own person there, which is Joshua. And now there are 13 spies that went in the promised land and visited the promised land. And it's amazing. Before we read that, I want to make this very clear. You remember every time God would promise them the promised land, how the word were? It's a country where honey and milk. It's an amazing country, okay? And then he will always say, with no exception, he starts by saying, it's a country with honey and milk and so rich and this and this and this and this. And then God will say, it's a country of the Hittites and the Canaanites, the country of Amorites. Am I right or not? He was never hiding that from them. He was never making them believe that this is an empty, undwelled country, land that he is giving them. Oh, I kept it for you. It's empty. You just enter in it and it's yours. No, he never kept that from them. He always gave them the information. It's a very rich country. Milk and honey. But there are people there. It's populated. These countries are populated. But I'm giving it to you. I don't know why, but that part surprised the spies. When they came back with the report, here is the report.
Then they told him and said, We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit.
That part of the report is good. I mean, they said, we check it out. It's exactly what God said. You see that? They didn't say, whoa, look what we found there. No, they said, it truly flows with milk. A reference to what God said before. We check it out, and exactly what God said, we found. Okay? And then continue.
Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there.
Nevertheless. Nevertheless. And then you take the entire report into a completely different direction. From a positive to a very negative report. You just use the word nevertheless. No? I hate that word. I heard it. You know, when you do something, and someone comes to you and says, yes, I love that, and I love that, I love that, and I love that because you did this, and you did that, and you did that. Nevertheless, and from that moment on, here you go. And everything was said before is just washed out. Is wiped out. It's no more there. Nevertheless, yes, God gave us a country exactly as he promised. Nevertheless, they said, the people who dwell in the land are strong. Now, this is their report. It's like they are saying, probably God himself is surprised to learn that the people in the country are strong. No, I'm very serious. This is not just Pastor Nick's conclusion. Let me tell you, it's here. The Lord spoke to Moses, number 13, verse 1, we just read. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, send men to spy. You get that? I mean, God is saying, I don't know what's going on in that country. I don't know what's going on there. I don't know what kind of people are there. I don't know what this country offers. I know nothing about it, so let's send some spies. And the spies, they did their job diligently. They came with a report, and they said, yeah, we found the milk. We found the honey. But maybe this escaped you, God. There are very strong people out there. We know that's why you sent us. So we came back and told you, hey, there are strong people out there. Maybe you don't know that, but hey, you see that they were very diligently and doing their job, these spies. Numbers chapter 13, verse 30.
Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature.
So, here is what they are saying. We are not able to go up. God is offering the grace. Out of his grace, he's saying, I'm giving you this land. I'm going to take away all these dwelling people in the land, in the country. I'm going to destroy them. I'm going to do it. I'm going to give you this land. They were there. They saw the strong people, and they said, we are not able to go up against these people. They are stronger than, what they said? They are stronger than, yeah, of course they are stronger than you. That is why you need the intervention of God. And that is why God is saying, I'm going to give it to you. Don't you get it? God knows you can't do it. God knows you are not able. God knows you are not the people able to take so many countries. Oh, he knows that. He knew it from the beginning. This is why he said, I am going to do it for you. You need me. But they went there and checked it out if they can do it. When God sent the spy, he sent the spy to come back with the conclusion, God is right. We need him. Otherwise, we will never go there. That should be the right conclusion. You understand me? This is why God sent the spy there. He didn't say there to check it out. I don't know what's going on there. Just check it out for me. No. He sent the spies there so that they will come with a conclusion, with their report, and report to each and every tribe of Israel to bring them the reality, to bring them back to reality. And the reality of you guys is you are not able. You can't do it. This is why you need God. And unless we make God to come with us, we are of no hope here. The only chance is God to be with us. But no, they didn't get that message. For some reason, they thought it's upon them. It is their responsibility to take over. And their conclusion was, they are stronger than us. We are not going to be able to go against them. They are stronger than we are. When you think that the ability of God's grace to meet our need depends on your ability to do your part, you fall from grace. I want you to write that down and encircle in your page. That is very important understanding. We grew up, most of us, we grew up into a church that always emphasized our part to be done. Am I right? Oh, Jesus died on the cross. He did his part. Now it is my turn to do my part. Is that how you've been taught? I've been brought up with that. Always there is my part to be done. Here you go. When you think that the ability of God to give you the grace and the gift depends on your doing your part, you are already falling from grace. And we will see that. These very people who thought that God cannot give them the country because they were not able to do their part, because they were stronger than we, the report was saying, these people are going to die as a punishment from the Lord, right there on the spot. What is their fault? What is their guilt? Their guilt was that they thought that God cannot give them the grace. He is not able to deliver the gift of grace unless they will do their part. And since they concluded we can't do our part, then God cannot give us the grace. So let's go back. That was their report. Whoa, that's terrible, has terrible implication for our daily life. I mean, the Bible says God is faithful even when we are not faithful. God is faithful to whatever he promises even when we are not faithful to do our part. He is still faithful because he is not limited by your part. He is not limited by your abilities or your performance in any way. And if you think that you hinder God's plan because of your poor performance, then you fall from grace. And these people die because of that, rejecting God's grace because we think we are not ready for it. It's severely punished by God. It's a sin. People will never be ready for God's grace. That's the reality. If we'll be ready for God's grace, there will be no need for God's grace whatsoever. God's grace comes always supernaturally. If we will be able to do something supernaturally without God, then there will be no need for God. Do you get that? If you think that I'm ready to do something supernaturally, you are already falling from grace. You are in fact saying, I'm like God. And if you are God, then you don't need God, neither his intervention. The gift of grace always comes miraculously, and it can't be appreciated from the perspective of limited human abilities. The people who reject God's grace and thought other to do so died as punishment, and we'll see that. And God's plan to grace his people is the only one there is. And opposing it is leaving people without hope whatsoever. Let's continue with the report in Numbers chapter 14, verse 2.
And the whole congregation said to them, If only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, Let us select a leader and return to Egypt.
Since I was young, I heard this comment about God in the Bible. I grew up and I heard that. I went to theology school, and that was a question that was repeated over and over again at any class we had during the theology school. I became a pastor, and I heard that question over and over and over again, and that is why God killed an entire generation in the wilderness. You know which is the answer? The biblical answer to that? Because they asked for it. No, I'm very serious. They died in answer to their own prayers. Here is the prayer. if only we had died in this wilderness. And God answered to their prayer. Guess what? 40 years later, it was a fulfilled prayer. God is always faithful. If this is what you ask, this is what you get. He always answers prayers, and this is one of them. I'm not being sarcastic here. I'm being very realistic. Sometimes we say with our mouths something, and then it happens to us. And you ask, why, God, why? You asked for it? Isn't this what you said like 3 months ago, or 3 years ago, or 5 years ago? Oh, I already forgot about it. Yeah, but God never forgets. He always answers your prayers. This is their prayer. If we all only died in the wilderness. But let's continue to read what report Joshua gave.
But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes, and they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, The land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. And all the congregation said to stone them with stones.
They were too good for them. They couldn't handle them. No? Caleb and Joshua, too good, let's stone them. But you see, what is important here is the fact that this Joshua was able to catch the mind of God. He was accustomed to the mind of God. He knew exactly what was the reason of God into sending them to spy the country. He came back with the right report. He's saying, yes, the land is good. Yes, the people that lives in the country, they are strong. Yes. But he also added, if the Lord delights in us, in other words, hey, you make sure, that's your job. Your job is to make God to delight in you. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into the land and gives it unto us. He will give it to us. No fight. It's not your part. He's not expecting you to do your part. It's not about that. And even if you are about to do something, he is going to empower you to do it. So don't worry. He can handle it. Just do what he says. And then he comes up with this concept that is amazing. He's saying, God is no longer with them, but God is with us. And because of that, we are going to obtain the victory. Now, I'm telling you, there are some demons out there, and there is a Satan out there, and God is no longer with him, and no longer with them. But God is with us. When you are fighting him, keep that always in your mind. God is no longer with them. He is with us. That is why we are going to have the victory. That is the reality about our status in God. Numbers chapter 14, 36.
Now the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, who returned and made all the congregation complain against him by bringing a bad report out of the land, those very men who brought the evil report about the land died by the plague before the Lord. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive, of all the men who went to spy out the land. According to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, for each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year, namely 40 years, and you shall know my rejection. I, the Lord, have spoken this. I will surely do so to all this evil congregation who are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall be consumed, and there they shall die.
First, we have two categories of people. A category is the spies, the ones that brought an evil report. They didn't just reject the grace of God. They were teaching others to do so. They were influencing others to do so. Pointing out some things that may happen to you guys. If you go there, they may kill you. They are strong. They are the giants. Be careful out there. And actually brought confusion and doubts in the hearts of people. and made them not to accept the grace of God. Because of that, they were punished right there and they were killed on the spot. That's one category. And I hope you are not among them. You are not discouraging people to accept God's grace, because God's grace comes always with something that you may not like it. The second category of people are the other ones that heard the message of the spies. They also rejected. They associated with the spies, the evil spies report. They agree with them, and they also rejected the grace of God. However, they were not killed on the spot. They were killed during 40 years in the wilderness, 1 year for each day, God said. Now why? And here is the beauty about God's character and his willingness to give us the grace. Why in the world will God let them wander in the wilderness for 40 years? They started by rejecting God's grace. We don't want the grace of a land. They went back from that land. They came without people without a country. They went back as people without a country. So their need, their main need, was not fulfilled. The grace of God is invented in order to meet our needs. And when we reject God's grace, we reject the only thing that can meet and fulfill our needs. When we reject God's grace, we remain in that need. And we continue to struggle in that need. They remain without a country. That's why they needed to wander in no one's land for 40 years. The second thing is, as they wander in no one's land in the wilderness, they face challenges. Often without water, often without bread, often without meat. You recall that? Beaten by the snakes, attacked by people, lands around, and they always find themselves not able to deal with all of this. So what they will do? They will cry out to God, and God will deliver them, but not at right away. God always let them have it. You will say, that's cruel. No. God always held them, but held them after they had enough. Like in the snake scenario case. They are bitten by the snakes, by the thousand they are dying, and they cry out to Moses, Moses, go to God. Have him help us here. And God is coming and said, yeah, put a snake on the pole and let people look at it, and the moment when they, why God intervenes but only after they have it? To learn by contrast the lesson of rejecting God's grace. When you reject God's grace, you reject him, himself, one. Secondly, when you reject God's grace, you are rejecting the only solution, the only resolution for your life, circumstance, and challenge. And when you reject God's grace, there is nothing else for you but only and only his mercy to send you another measure of grace. So let's take a look of the possibility, this idea of rejecting God's grace. Numbers chapter 14, verse 11, this is God's perspective in regarding those who are rejecting God's grace.
Then the Lord said to Moses, how long will these people reject me? And how long will they not believe me, with all the signs which I have performed among them?
People may say, well, we just rejected the promised land. No, they rejected me, God said. When you reject God's grace, you are actually rejecting him. I'm going to read now the points I'm trying to make today. Most of the time, accepting God's grace is not easy. You find them in the beginning of your outlines. Most of the time, to accept God's grace is not easy. And that is the reality, a common reality for us. There are consequences that look terrible at first glance, like going in the promised land, they are going to kill us. We have no chances. There are giants there. But at least your need will be supernaturally covered. In other words, you'll end up having a land. You are a people without a country. Now you will have a land. Yes, some of you will die there. Yes, fighting them, probably. Let's say. But hey, you'll have a land. For some people, however, the price for God's grace may seem too much, and they end up refusing it. Like salvation, they refuse. Like healing, they refuse. And many other gifts that God is willing to give. When God offers you grace, He is prepared to deal with the consequences that you may face for accepting it in your life. So don't worry, trust Him. God said, how long they refuse me and how long they will not believe in me. He has the ability. We need to trust Him. Rejecting God's grace is a sin. It's the sin of rejecting God Himself. Rejecting God's grace brings way more terrible consequences than the ones for accepting God's grace. What was the consequences for Israel? They said, if we accept God's grace, some of us, we are going to be killed there because they are the giants in the country. And they rejected. And after they rejected, they faced other consequences that were more terrible than the ones that may happen if they enter the country, the promised land. When you will face these terrible consequences of refusing God's grace, it will be only and only after you suffer enough that God will deliver you through additional measures of grace. And that is the experience of Israel. When they cry out for water, God gave them. But after they had enough, they were dying of thirst. Some of them, they died of thirst. When they were hungry, the same, and on and on and on. Every time they faced, God always have a resolution for them, always out of grace, always supernatural, but it always came after they had enough. Let me put it in this way so that you understand my point today. God took them from Egypt and brought them in the promised land, at the border of the promised land in 6 weeks. They suffered nothing. They have everything in their way. In their way, they have water, they had the food, they have everything. They suffered nothing 6 weeks. And have them enter the promised land, they will never suffer nothing. Everything we read about the 40 years in the wilderness and all that history will have not been there whatsoever. The struggles they faced in the wilderness 40 years, they will not have been there. The death of entire generation, their carcasses left in the wilderness, will not have been that in the history of humanity. Every single one came as a result of rejecting God's grace. Now, my question to you and to me this morning is, which one of our struggles are result of us rejecting God's grace? You see, 40 years of human experience because they rejected God's grace. And so much trouble they suffered because they rejected God's grace. I'm asking myself today, when I'm struggling in life, is this a result of me rejecting God's grace at one point, a gift that came from God because I thought by accepting it, I'm going to suffer and I don't want to take that? When we reject God's grace intended to cover up our needs, we continue to suffer the need itself and the consequences of rejecting God's grace. I know this was not a very positive message for you, but I think it was needed. It was a warning that is needed. I saw people rejecting God's grace so often. That is amazing. You offered them to pray for them, and you offered something, and after that they enter into a phase of their life where they pay the consequences of rejecting God's grace, and they are the first one crying out, why is Lord doing this to me? Why God allowed this to me? Isn't that the situation with the Israelites? They rejected God's grace, and 40 years in the wilderness, every time they were challenged, every time they faced something, every time they were in tribulation, every time they were in need, they were crying out, why, Lord? Why are you allowing this? We are your children. And everything was the consequence of their refusal. And they continued to blame God for everything they suffered 40 years, even though it was just a consequence of their refusal of God. I see that repeated over and over and again. And that's why I felt this today is needed to give a warning. Let's pray together. Father, you are wonderful. Your ways are always right and just. And in spite of the fact that the only thing we deserve is death, the punishment of sin, you have given us life and so many other positive gifts that comes from you. We praise you, Father. You have given us Jesus Christ and all things together with him. You have provided us with the grace, the main grace, the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. And today, Lord, after learning the lesson of Israel, we fear to be placed in a position where we reject your offers of grace. But Lord, we know that even though your grace sometimes may require of us more than we expect, we know that you can handle. We know that you can empower us to deal with all of this. And everything may come our way, we know that you can handle for us. And we have seen in the Israel history that after that entire generation died and they came back to the borders of the promised land, when they entered the land, it was you fighting for them. It was you dealing with the consequences of their accepting your grace. It was you destroying Jericho walls. It was you taking over the land. No person died. No one suffered by accepting your grace. We praise you, O Lord, and we ask you this morning, remove from our chest, remove from us the fear of accepting your grace, and, O Lord, open ourselves so that with full confidence in you, believing in you, we'll accept every measure of your grace. It was paid too expensive to be refused. And if we refuse it, oh Lord, we learn we'll pay it too expensive. So today, we are asking you, strengthen us, empower us, and make us confident in you, in your grace, in your love for us. In Jesus Christ, amen.